Greetings to all history enthusiasts and those who care about the fate of our planet. Today, we embark on an unusual journey, not just into the past, but into an alternative past that never existed, yet one that could have changed the entire course of human civilization. Imagine this. What if ecological consciousness and environmental protection movements had emerged not in the 19th or 20th century, but thousands of years ago? How would our world look today if ancient Romans, Egyptians, Chinese, or Maya had created the first nature conservation organizations? What ecological disasters of the past could have been prevented, and how would the path of humanity's technological development have changed? If you are fascinated by thought experiments, alternative history, and questions about human interaction with nature, be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We regularly explore unexpected turns in history, hidden connections between past events, and create fascinating scenarios of alternative civilization development. Today, we will immerse ourselves in an amazing world that could have existed if our ancestors had realized the value of natural resources and biodiversity long before the Industrial Revolution. First, let us define what we mean by the environmental movement. In the modern sense, these are organized efforts to protect the environment, preserve biodiversity, combat pollution, and use natural resources rationally. But was there anything similar in the ancient world? Did our ancestors have the beginnings of ecological thinking? Surprisingly, some elements of ecological consciousness can indeed be found in ancient cultures. Many traditional societies had taboos and restrictions that essentially served the purpose of preserving natural resources. For example, some Polynesian peoples had seasonal bans on fishing in certain lagoons, allowing fish stocks to recover. Native Americans often practiced controlled forest fires, which prevented the accumulation of undergrowth and reduced the risk of catastrophic fires. And in ancient China, even during the Zhou dynasty more than 2,500 years ago, there were laws prohibiting deforestation in certain seasons and territories. However, these practices were fragmented and usually based on religious beliefs or practical experience, rather than a systematic understanding of ecological relationships. They did not lead to the formation of full-fledged environmental movements capable of influencing society as a whole. But what if history had taken a different path? Let us imagine an alternative scenario in which the environmental movement originated in ancient Greece, the cradle of Western philosophy and science. In the 5th century before our era, Athens experienced a golden age under the leadership of Pericles. It was a time of flourishing philosophy, art, and democracy. Imagine that among the many philosophical schools of that time, a movement emerged that we might call natural philosophy or ecosophy. Its founder could have been, for example, the little-known philosopher Anaxagoras, who was already interested in natural sciences and was Pericles' mentor. In our alternative history, Anaxagoras, observing changes in the environment around growing Athens, deforestation, soil erosion, water pollution, formulates an idea revolutionary for his time. Nature is not just a resource for human use, but a complex interconnected system of which humans themselves are a part. Disruption of these interconnections, he argues, will inevitably lead to negative consequences for humanity itself. Anaxagoras creates a school of ecosophy that attracts students from educated Athenian youth. They begin to systematically study natural processes, relationships between different plant and animal species, and the impact of human activities on the environment. Gradually, a new worldview forms in which humans are seen not as masters of nature, but as its guardians and part of it. What might have happened next? Pericles, influenced by Anaxagoras, could have adopted a series of laws aimed at protecting the forests of Attica, limiting water pollution, and creating protected natural areas. These measures could have not only improved the ecological situation, but also strengthened Athens' economy by ensuring sustainable resource use. After the Peloponnesian War, when Athens lost to Sparta, the ideas of ecosophy could have spread throughout Greece and later influenced Alexander the Great and his successors. Imagine the Alexandrian Library not only as a center of science and philosophy, but also as the birthplace of the first ecological science, where scientists systematically study relationships in nature and develop sustainable land use methods. These ideas could have influenced Rome as well, which in our real history faced serious environmental problems. Deforestation on the Apennine Peninsula led to soil erosion and loss of fertility, which became one of the reasons for Rome's dependence on grain imports from Egypt and North Africa. In our alternative history, the Romans, adopting Greek ecological ideas, could have created a system of sustainable forest management, soil protection, and water resource conservation. Imagine a Roman emperor, for example Hadrian, who was known for his interest in architecture and construction, creating not only grand structures but also an extensive network of nature reserves throughout the empire. These territories, protected by imperial decrees, could have preserved Mediterranean biodiversity and prevented the extinction of many species that were exterminated in real history, such as the North African elephant or the Mesopotamian lion. Moreover, ecological thinking could have changed the very structure of the Roman economy. Instead of extensive expansion and exploitation of new territories, Rome could have focused on intensive agricultural development, creating sustainable irrigation systems, and selecting drought-resistant plant varieties. This could have made the empire less dependent on conquest and more stable in the long term. Of course, we cannot forget about other great civilizations of antiquity. Let us imagine how the environmental movement might have developed in ancient China, where some elements of ecological thinking already existed. In our alternative history, during the Warring States period, 5th-3rd centuries before our era, one of the rulers, inspired by Taoist philosophy of harmony with nature, creates the world's first system of protected natural territories. These imperial reserves are initially intended for imperial hunting, but gradually their function changes. They become places for studying nature, preserving rare plant and animal species, and sources of medicinal herbs. When Qin Shi Huang unifies China in 221 before our era, he not only builds the Great Wall and creates a centralized bureaucracy, but also establishes the Imperial Department for Nature Protection. This organization is responsible for controlling deforestation, protecting river systems, and preventing soil erosion. Thanks to its activities, Chinese civilization avoids many environmental problems that in real history led to floods, droughts, and famine. During the Han Dynasty, 206 before our era to 220 of our era, ecological knowledge becomes systematized. Detailed maps of natural resources are created, and methods of sustainable agriculture, forestry, and fishing are developed. Chinese scientists begin to understand the relationships between different components of ecosystems long before this term was invented. This could have led to technological development in a completely different direction. Instead of maximizing short-term productivity, Chinese engineers and agronomists could have focused on creating sustainable systems that can function for centuries without depleting resources. Imagine extensive terraced fields, integrated aquaculture and agriculture systems, cities designed with consideration for natural cycles and energy flows. Ideas of sustainable development could have spread along the Silk Road, along with goods and technologies. India, Persia, and then Europe could have adopted these concepts and adapted them to their conditions. The world could have avoided many ecological catastrophes of the past: desertification of North Africa and the Middle East, mass deforestation in medieval Europe, extermination of many animal species. But let us see how this alternative history might have developed further in the era corresponding to our Middle Ages. In this period in real history, ecological thinking rather regressed, giving way to a religious worldview in which nature was viewed as something given to humans for use by God. In our alternative history, however, monasteries could have become not only centers for preserving ancient knowledge, but also guardians of ecological wisdom. Imagine an order of monk ecologists who see caring for nature as service to God. They create sustainable agricultural systems, preserve forests, cultivate medicinal plants, study animals and plants as part of divine creation. These monks could have influenced medieval rulers, convincing them of the importance of preserving natural resources. Kings and princes could have created protected forests not only for their own hunting pleasures, but also for preserving biodiversity and protecting water resources. Medieval cities could have developed with ecological principles in mind, including water purification systems, green zones, and sustainable waste management. With the advent of the Renaissance and the beginning of the scientific revolution, ecological knowledge could have received a new impulse. Scientists like Leonardo da Vinci, who in reality was interested in natural processes, could have laid the foundations of modern ecology. Imagine a treatise on the interconnections of all things, written by Leonardo, in which he describes food chains, nutrient cycles, and interactions between different species. The great geographical discoveries in this alternative history could have been accompanied not only by colonization and exploitation of new lands, but also by scientific study of their ecosystems. Instead of cutting down American forests for plantations, Europeans could have learned sustainable land use methods from indigenous peoples, adapted local agricultural crops, and created integrated systems combining European and American elements. The Industrial Revolution in this alternative world could have taken a completely different path. Instead of extensive use of coal and other fossil fuels, engineers and inventors could have focused on developing cleaner energy sources. Imagine that James Watt, instead of improving the steam engine, creates an efficient wind turbine or improved water mill. In this world, concepts of circular economy, where waste from one production becomes raw material for another, could have appeared earlier. 19th century cities could have avoided the terrible pollution that characterized real industrial centers of that time. Instead of gloomy smoking factories, imagine industrial complexes integrated with natural systems, using energy from the sun, wind, and water, recycling waste into useful materials. By the 20th century, this alternative world could have reached a level of technological development comparable to ours, but with much less impact on the environment. Imagine cities where buildings are covered with gardens, where transportation runs on renewable energy, where industry and nature coexist in harmony. Of course, we cannot assume that there would be no problems and conflicts in this alternative history. Human nature remains unchanged, and the struggle for power, resources, and territory would continue. But the general direction of development could have been different, more sustainable, and less destructive to nature. One interesting aspect of this alternative history could have been the development of international cooperation in nature protection. Imagine that already in the 18th or 19th century, an international organization similar to modern UNEP or IUCN is created, coordinating efforts of different countries to preserve biodiversity, combat pollution, and sustainably use resources. Such an organization could have facilitated the spread of knowledge and technologies between different regions of the world, helped create transboundary protected areas, and developed international standards in environmental protection. This could have led to a more even and fair distribution of environmental benefits and risks between different countries and peoples. However, even in our alternative history, it would be naive to assume a complete absence of environmental problems. Humanity would still face challenges related to population growth, technology development, and climate change, but having a centuries-old tradition of ecological thinking and sustainable practices, it could be better prepared to solve these problems. For example, instead of denying anthropogenic climate change or responding to it too late, countries in this alternative world could have started reducing greenhouse gas emissions as early as the late 19th century, as soon as scientists noticed the first signs of global warming. By the 21st century, the problem could have been largely solved. It is also interesting to think about how culture and art might look in this ecologically oriented world. Perhaps the main aesthetic value would be not grandeur and conquest of nature, but harmony with it. Architecture could have developed in the direction of integrating buildings with the environment. Literature and painting could more often address themes of human-nature interconnection, and music could draw inspiration from natural sounds and rhythms. Society as a whole could be more decentralized, with smaller but more self-sufficient communities connected in a network for exchanging knowledge, resources, and cultural values. The economy could focus not so much on GDP growth as on improving quality of life with minimal environmental impact. Of course, all this is just a thought experiment, an alternative history that never existed, but it allows us to think about several important things. First, about how closely our technologies, social structures, and cultural values are connected with how we perceive nature and interact with it. Changing this basic relationship could lead to a completely different path of civilization development. Second, that many environmental problems we face today were not inevitable. They are the result of specific historical decisions, technological choices, economic and political systems. Another path was possible and remains possible now. Third, that even if we cannot change the past, we can learn from it. By studying both ecological catastrophes of the past and examples of sustainable practices of traditional societies, we can find inspiration and ideas for solving modern problems. And finally, that the future is still not determined. We are at a crossroads, and the decisions we make today will determine which path our civilization will take next. Will it be a path of continuing destruction of natural systems or a path of restoring harmony between humanity and nature? Perhaps the most important lesson from this mental journey into an alternative past is that sustainable development is not just a set of technologies or policies. It is a holistic worldview based on understanding the deep interconnections between all elements of natural and social systems. And although we cannot go back in time and create an environmental movement in ancient Greece or China, we can here and now begin to form such a worldview and bring it to life. In real history, the first modern environmental movements emerged in the 19th century as a reaction to the destructive consequences of the Industrial Revolution. People began to realize the value of wilderness, the danger of pollution, the importance of preserving resources for future generations. In the 20th century, these ideas received scientific justification, social support, and political embodiment. Today, the environmental movement is global, multifaceted, and influential. It includes both large international organizations and local initiatives, both scientific research and practical actions, both political activism and changes in personal lifestyle. Perhaps our time is that turning point, that alternative branch of history when humanity finally realizes the need for harmonious coexistence with nature and begins to act accordingly. Perhaps future historians will view the 21st century as the time of the great ecological turn, the time when we change the course of civilization development from destructive to restorative. And perhaps it is our actions today that will determine whether future generations will live in a world similar to that harmonious alternative reality we imagined, or in a world suffering from the consequences of an ecological crisis. The choice is ours, and although we cannot change the past, we can still create a better future based on wisdom accumulated by humanity over millennia of interaction with nature and on new knowledge that modern science gives us. I hope this journey into an alternative past was as fascinating for you as it was for me. If you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like it, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss new episodes about amazing turns in history and possible alternative paths of human development. And in the comments, tell us what other ecological practices of ancient civilizations. How do you think what decisions of the past could have radically changed the ecological situation in the modern world? In upcoming episodes, we will continue to explore amazing what-if stories that help us better understand not only the past, but also the present and possible variants of the future. Until next time in the world of alternative history.